Hey everyone, this is John Karp.
And this is Rudy Malumbo.
And starting January 28th, we'll be starting a new podcast called Cogito, C-O-G-I-T-O. As soon as the 48 Laws of Power podcast ends, we'll be starting this new podcast that will explore some new intellectual topics as well as humorous ones. And we hope to have a loose and fun time with it. So tune in on January 28th for Cogito. And until then,
enjoy the show. What's going on, everybody? You tune into the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumbo.
And I'm John Karp.
Let's get right into this book. This episode, we're going to do the last two laws, Law 47 and Law 48. Law 47 is, do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop. The judgment is, the moment of victory is often the moment of greatest peril. In the heat of victory, arrogance and overconfidence can push you past the goal you had aimed for, and by going too far, you make more enemies than you defeat. Do not allow success to go to your head. There is no substitute for strategy and careful planning. Set a goal, and when you reach it, stop.
All right, so the transgression of this law is about Cyrus the Great, the Persian emperor that many of you probably know, especially if you've ever read the Bible. He's mentioned in there.
Yeah.
So Cyrus had built a very vast empire in a very short amount of time, and won a lot of significant battles and conquered, places like Babylon. I think down into, it was Egypt as well, if I'm not mistaken, or around that area. I know around Syria, or Assyria. Well, present day Syria at that time it was called Assyria.
Assyria, yeah.
That's where Syria comes from.
The Assyrians.
Yeah, that's where Assyria comes from, by the way, if anyone was wondering where the name of that country came from. Mm-hmm. But in any case, so the point is that Cyrus the Great built a vast empire in a short amount of time. So anyway, so he kind of came to believe that he was unstoppable, I guess you could say, right? And so he continued to go eastward with his conquests, not really consolidating what he had already conquered, right? And making it so that it was functional. Remember, we've talked about this when empires expand too quickly. It kind of opens them up to be very vulnerable because they have a very vast amount of land to protect, but they haven't taken the time to consolidate their power and be able to actually protect the territories that they've gained. So that's kind of a foreshadowing as to what's about to happen here.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he goes eastward to this kingdom called the Kingdom of Massagetai, I think is how you pronounce it, kind of over by the southern part of the Caspian Sea, in that part of the world. And when he reached this river, which I can't remember what the name of the river is right now, but anyway, he reached the river, which kind of served as a border for the kingdom. He stopped there to set up camp, and it was then that, as he was setting up camp, that he got a message from the queen of the Mazzagati, and the queen advised him to step away and, be content with the glory you've already achieved and leave us be, right? It's really no skin off your nose if you don't conquer us, right? Mm-hmm. Well, but she figured, because she knew who Cyrus was, obviously, that he would disregard this and go ahead and attempt an attack on her land. So she offered him to be able to cross the river, aka the border, and bring his armies rather to the other side of the river where her armies and his armies could engage in a fair battle, right? So Cyrus accepted this offer, but he also took it as an opportunity to play a cunning trick, set a trap rather, and which he had done many times. So what he did was, once him and his men crossed the river, they set up this camp and they made this really bountiful feast, and they left it on the table, and he left his less skilled warriors there while he took the rest of his army back to basically hid them away from this fake camp that they set up.
Okay.
And so, sure enough, a detachment of the Massagati army came down onto this fake camp and slaughtered all the the soldiers that were there. And when they saw this massive feast on the table, they just went to town on it, because these people, the Masagati, were a people who didn't have a whole lot of luxuries or comforts, really. It was a very rough warrior kind of culture, right? So they saw all his food and all his drink, and they just stuffed themselves to the gills and drank themselves into a stupor. So with this whole military detachment now passed out or otherwise immobilized, that's when Cyrus led the rest of his army through the camp and slaughtered the majority of the Masagati soldiers and captured the rest. And one of the individuals that he captured was the general, whose name was Spargupses, I think is how you say it.
Yeah.
Who happened to be the son of the queen. And so when the queen found out about this, she sent a messenger saying, okay, you've proven your point. You've won this great battle. Now leave and release my son, or I will, in her own words, I will give you more blood than you can satisfy with your gluttony. That's what her words were.
Yeah.
So, and of course, Cyrus scoffed at this, and at this point, the son of the queen, realizing that he wasn't going to be released, he couldn't take the embarrassment of being captured any longer, so he took his own life. And of course, when the queen found out about this, she flew into a rage. So she gathered all of her available forces and descended upon the Persians, and there was this massive battle that ensued between Cyrus's forces and the queen's forces, and it was a very bloody battle. But at the end of it, Cyrus was killed in the battle, and she had him beheaded and put into a wine sack full of blood. So thus he got his fill of blood, as she said he would.
Wow.
So, and after Cyrus's death, his empire fell apart because, like I said, he did not consolidate what he had gained.
Yeah.
And, this empire couldn't hold itself together, so it collapsed soon after.
Yeah. And it's, with that story in particular, I'm definitely certain that when Cyrus set out, in the beginning, when he was, when he was going out and conquering everything, like, I'm sure the goal wasn't that. The goal wasn't to end up, being in a big battle with him and all the queen's forces and all that stuff, and it ending that way. The reason why it got to that point was because of his arrogance, and because he felt like, when she gave him that warning and he kind of scoffs at it, he kind of felt like, oh, who's she talking to? I'm this guy who's undefeated, what I mean, and I can do whatever I want. So, all those warnings mean nothing to me, and that was all because it was all ego at that point, because he had achieved everything he set out to do, and so because of all those successes, really kind of something really bloody and sinister happened at the end, but it was all his fault. That's kind of one of the reasons why I think this is another one of those laws that's one of my favorites, because I feel like when you set out to, it could be anything, achieve a goal, or when you are, if you're in the realm of power or whatever it is, you set out to do something and you're very strategic about it. You write down what the goal you have. You write down the steps to achieve that goal. Once you're done with that goal and you take any step further, using that power you amassed, that's when the strategy goes away, and then it's all emotion, and that's how you know something bad is going to happen after that, right? Because you're not being strategic anymore. You know what I mean? So that, I think, like that story highlights it very well. And again, I feel like this law is really all about the trappings of the ego. About how you have to kind of keep that in check, It's going to try to manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but you should always be on top of just not doing anything out of emotion, but doing things out of strategy. So,
yeah, and what Robert Greene says is to kind of help protect yourself against your amassed ego, basically. It's worth remembering that the particulars of the situation allowed you to gain the success that you've had.
Yeah.
And that simply thinking that you can just repeat the same actions that you've done so in the past, that may not spell success in the future.
Absolutely.
Because, each move you make it and how effective it is contingent on the particulars and the situation at the time.
The particulars, the environment, all those things change over time.
So basically to think that, you can just do the same thing over and over and over again and achieve the same result is, that's, you're not thinking with much foresight.
For all the football fans, I keep thinking of 2010 Tim Tebow when he played for the Broncos. And obviously Tim Tebow was not a very good quarterback, but the Broncos made the playoffs that year. They played the Steelers. And Tim Tebow went back in overtime, and he threw just the ugliest throw of all time, right? And the defensive back in front of his receiver tried to grab it, but he missed the ball, and the receiver caught a 10-yard pass and ran it 87 yards.
The receiver from the other team?
From the Broncos. So he actually completed that pass.
Oh, wow.
Tebow threw the ugliest pass of all time, and it got tipped in the air.
Right.
His receiver still caught it and ran 87 yards for a touchdown. They won that game.
Wow.
But 9 out of 10 times, that wouldn't work.
No.
So Tebow could, if I was Tebow and let's say I do that game 1 of the NFL season, I'd be like, if I was fully, just my ego ran amok, I'd be like, oh, I could do that any day. And then I'd be mistaken.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's kind of, it's, I think in general that's how things kind of work. You have to. The reason why that pass worked in that game was because of the situation at that time, and not because of how invincible he might be. No disrespect to Tebow, but we're in Florida, so So
watch out.
Yeah, but that's typically how things are. You have to really take. You have to be aware of the situation you're in and why that thing worked. Things don't just things don't just work because of you. Things work because you set it in motion in a particular way. And you could be more aware of it if you're strategic about things. If you're emotional about things, you lose complete perspective on stuff, and you think, oh, it's because I'm great. And that's not the reality of the situation. So that's part of the bad of going past the mark in victory sometimes.
Yeah. The thing is, once you've achieved a great deal of success, that's when you need to really pay attention the most.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people achieve a lot of success and they think they can just hang out and just kind of coast. But no, that's when you need to be the most vigilant.
Yep.
Or vigilant, rather.
That's when you have to be the most vigilant. I feel like it's and Green even talks about later when he talks about how you learn more from losses, because the losses teach you a lesson. And then okay, if I want to win at this thing, I just have to not do what I just did. But I kind of feel like victory teaches you a lesson too. With victories, it's a real lesson in humility, and humility is very important. And we the last episode we talked about how fake humility is something you have to watch out for also. But real humility is because I growing up and things like that, when I'd hear people say that, in your wins kind of be humble and things like that, it was always something that was hard for me to grasp, because after a victory, everything inside of you is telling you, yeah, I'm the best and all this other stuff. But the humility comes from just you knowing that, hey, the reason I'm victorious today is really kind of because the fates allowed it, or because things just kind of helped it transpire a certain way, or it came about because of a lot of effort and a lot of work over a long period of time. So it's by you knowing that, hey, I have to conform myself to kind of reality in order to get this done, and that anyone could have done this too if they just did the work I did, or and things like that. Just knowing how you really are just a part of everything else, and you're not really above anyone or anything. I think that's kind of where the humility comes from. So I feel like in victories, if you give yourself time to kind of slow down and to kind of to think kind of critically on that, I feel like there's no other way but to be humble about victorious situations. But it's like you have to be around them, you have to attain them in order to really kind of get that insight. I feel like so. I feel like you can learn a lot from both victories and losses.
Yeah, kind of going with what you just said there, where you can learn just as much from your losses as you can from your victories. Mm-hmm. Robert Greene goes so far as to say that good luck is actually more dangerous than bad luck, because if you have a continual succession of good luck, you can you haven't learned anything, right? Yeah. You just the circumstances were just right for you,
and everything worked.
Yeah. Whereas if everything keeps going wrong, you have to go, okay, well, what can I do differently that will produce a much more success for me?
Absolutely.
A better result.
Absolutely.
And the thing is that those situations, they change. You might be, striking out a lot, but then all of a sudden you'll start hitting a lot. Start making progress. And if you've learned how to adjust your way of thinking so that you can, find success more often in different circumstances, you're going to have a longer sustained amount of success than if you're just kind of going from one success to another, and then oops, now you keep failing all the time. Yeah. You haven't learned different ways in succeeding and how to change according to the environment and to the conditions, and that's kind of the thing, is that power follows rhythms and patterns. Yeah. And you have to be able to adapt and improvise and change course. And that kind of goes against one law we talked about, where it was playing all the way to the end. But even when we talked about that law, I think even in the reversal, we said that you have to maintain some ability. You have to maintain some ability to improvise as well. And we're going to, when we talk about 48, we're going to get way more into the
adaptability.
The adaptability and how important that is. But I thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah,
right
absolutely.
now.
Yep. Like the planning all the way at the end, and this law, I feel like they also kind of work in concert. They're just the ability to just know where your boundaries are. This is where I start and this is where I end. Anything past where I end is something that I don't actually want. It's just something that I'm gratifying myself with, and everything like that. So yeah, I definitely, I feel like there's a connection with that too.
Right.
Another thing I was going to say is just just in terms of going back to what Robert Greene was saying about the rhythm of power and kind of how it alternates between force and cunning and things like that. I think in this book, Greene kind of talks about power being something that's like a long game. It's something that it takes a long time to do, and it's something that it takes a lot of effort to produce and stuff. And so it so it's definitely not. It's something that just it takes time, and it's something that again takes a lot of effort, and it just takes a lot of work and things like that. So it's going through it's essentially going through a process. It's a whole plan that you kind of delineate and things that you do over time. So it's not something that comes quickly, goes quickly. It's a long process, and it's something that actually, upon reading this book, I don't know. I mean, my first thing was, he's kind of like giving quick and dirty secrets or whatever, shortcuts and things like that. But I feel like in this book, there's a lot of it where it's like, this is a marathon and not a sprint. And I kind of feel like it's, I think like those kinds of things can apply to like a lot of different things in life, in terms of maybe goal setting, in terms of mastery and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I that's just something I kind of got from this law in particular, but also other laws that kind of talk a lot about, starting kind of a long process, so.
Absolutely. When you're something he brought up too is like sometimes if you have gained a lot of success, it pays to kind of lay low for a bit, and this way other people are kind of lulled into a sense of inaction, right? And I think you and I were talking about this before we started recording. We were talking about music and how sometimes you see artists who established themselves, say, back in the 70s, and then they come out with, they just keep pumping out stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just not as good as what the stuff that really made them famous in the first place.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, you kind of sit back and you wonder, well, like, why don't these guys just, take a break? Surely they have enough money. They could do some traveling or, chill out on their yacht for a while. And then, as they get inspired and come up with like, oh, this is a neat idea, I'll put this away and save it for something.
Yeah.
Then come out with something that's really great instead of, pressuring yourself to, work yourself dry, basically.
Yeah.
I kind of think that idea of lying low and, for a while and then coming out again would be kind of like what you and I were talking about with like some of these successful musicians, instead of like just continuously feeling like you have to pump more stuff out and it might not be as good as whatever, but I gotta get something out. Instead of doing that, like maybe just take some time off, get some
lay low for a little
bit and then make the next big move, have time to kind of marinate onto what it is you want to do next.
And I mean it fits into the to kind of this law too, right? Where you're saying, you go past the mark. So you've, as an artist or someone, let's say you're making music or whatever, as soon as you first come out and you're working on a project, you have something in your head about what you want that work to be, but also what, like, maybe you want your legacy to be and things like that, right? So when you do achieve success, let's say you sell a bunch of records and you're very happy with it, for you then to go, oh, like, I'm a famous musician now, let me capitalize off of all. I mean, it can be interpreted that way. By you just pumping music out and maybe not being as thoughtful about it, you're like saying, okay, let me capitalize on all the fame that I have now and make as much money as I can on it. I feel like if you sit back and you reassess and go, okay, I achieved my goal. Now, what else do I want to do to kind of maybe establish my legacy and stuff like that? And then you could be a little more strategic about it. I feel like a lot of the artists that I like now, I listen to a lot of like hip hop or something like that, and I know of a lot of like hip hop artists who have done that, who, especially this year, who've come out with like 2-3 albums this year alone just because they were riding a wave, right? But I also know, out of all the artists I've listened to from the 90s to now, someone like a Jay-Z or something who, he achieved a lot of success early, but then he took about 2-3 years off. Same thing you're saying about kind of laying low. And he tried to, it seems like what he did is he tried to say, okay, I am going to be adaptable. And I'm going to try to see what trends are out there and then maybe adapt to that and continue to establish my legacy that way. Because, and then what ended up happening is, he kind of like around the 2009 era and all that stuff, people who know a little bit about hip hop know that a lot of rappers started using like auto-tune and things like that. And so what he did is he waited that trend out, and then he came out with a song called Death of Auto-Tune. And so that kind of brought him into the limelight a little bit, because he, like, people who were maybe younger who didn't know about his previous work were like, oh, who's this person who's kind of making a defiant move about the industry right now, you know what I mean? But he was able to do that because he was adaptable. He saw, he knew that the kind of stuff he was talking about in the 90s wasn't going to work in 2010. And then he's also kind of just maintained that over time. I think there's a lot of examples like that with people in all genres too,
Oh yeah, definitely.
Who they don't necessarily just sit back and just go, okay, this thing worked before, let me just keep doing it. But they're adaptable with it. They know when to sit back. They know when to be bold. They know when to alternate back and forth. And those are the ones, honestly, they're the most successful. The ones who just have one formula and, keep going on and on and on, I don't think are successful. I think there's a few exceptions, sure. But in general, I don't think that tends to work.
Yeah, definitely. And the next thing is, if you're working under somebody, if you're serving a master, as Robert Greene puts it, you know, when you're trying to impress them too much, sometimes when people try to make a good impression on their boss, they step kind of out of their bounds, and it ends up offending their boss instead.
Yeah.
Right. And well, a good example is he was talking about this Chinese general Wu Qi, and he had this officer who sent his forces out before the general wanted him to. And even though he came back victorious with the heads of, their enemies, Wu Qi had this officer beheaded, and he said, he even said, a talented officer, but a disobedient one. And because, well, yeah, this officer may have won that victory once, but there's a reason why Wu Qi was waiting for a particular moment to attack. And, strategically, it would have been more advantageous for them to have attacked when Wu Qi wanted. And the fact is, again, yes, this officer was talented and he won a victory, but what if, next time around he might not be so lucky?
Yeah.
Right? And then your whole Wu Qi's entire plan of conquest would have been compromised, right? So having this officer around who is just going to, do what he can to make himself look like he's the greatest thing on the planet and, really impress the general, it did the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Piss the general off. So it's one of those things that, and I think the same thing applies when you're working for somebody, it's not that you don't want to make a good impression, you do, but you have to, again, you have to set your mark as to, okay, I'm going to stop right here, because if I go beyond this, it may not work out to my favor, and if it backfires, it's going to be detrimental to me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of rules to this game, as they say.
And something else. So like here's a big thing. If you achieve, don't think that a small success will lead you necessarily to a much bigger success. Sometimes you might have to pass up on something that might be considered a success in order to achieve a much bigger success. So, you might go, okay, well, I could take this job right here that doesn't really have a whole lot of opportunity, but at least I can get paid something.
Yeah.
Or you could pass that up for another job that may not pay as much, but if you work hard at in that particular job, the opportunities that will grow from it will pay you more in the long run than if you just took that job that paid well in the short term.
1,000,000%. Yeah. And that's actually something Greene talks about a little bit in Mastery, where he brings up the example of like an Albert Einstein, right, who was bottom of his class, really, not that successful in school, even though he was obviously a brilliant thinker. So when he graduated from college or wherever he was, all his classmates got really high-paying jobs, in engineering and science and all that, and all these other companies, and he didn't want that. He didn't want that for himself. Not because he didn't want to be challenged, but because he was kind of driven by something else, And so what he did is, again, we all know he got the job at the patent office, but he was saying like the job was a low-paying job. It helped him survive, it helped him like pay his bills and things like that. And it wasn't as rigorous on his mental capacities and all that. It wasn't too rigorous, so it gave him some latitude to kind of after work really exercise his brain, thinking about the stuff he was thinking about. So even though to some people at the time they might have been like, oh, he's passing up an opportunity. He's passing up opportunities to work somewhere where he could get paid more or where he could really make a difference and things like that. But to him, it was, oh, this is just kind of one step along the journey. You know what I mean? It's very important to me that I reclaim time outside of work to do things that are very important to me. And boom, over time, all that time that he used ended up making him one of the, the greatest scientific minds of all time. And I feel like that's something that we can all use. We can all apply. obviously what's most important is the goal at the end. All the steps in between, they're all important also, but they're important because they're taking you to that goal. So sometimes, yeah, you do have to take kind of some momentary losses in order to get there.
It's kind of like, as long as you have the end in mind, that's what we want to go for. It's kind of like this law saying, like, don't go past the goal you've made necessarily, or until you've gone, okay, I've reached that goal.
Yeah.
What's next?
What's
okay.
next? Yeah.
I could do this. I could do that.
Yeah.
I think I'll do this. It's kind of like saying that, but it's also saying, like, don't forget to achieve that goal. Because, sometimes in life, you set out to achieve one thing, and then, you're offered a job that pays really well, and you go, oh, well, you know what? I think I'll do this job because it pays really well, and just forget my goals.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you just stuck to it, and you didn't waver from your path, you would be making more money, or you would be having this success that you want to have, or whatever.
You'd probably be more fulfilled, or you would be happier, or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So it does tie together. And the last thing that he brought up was, if you're given a favor, this is so true, if you're given a favor, just graciously accept it and withdraw. Any subsequent favors from then on should be just earned.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than when people ask for more favors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
So, that's something to think about. Like, if the boss, gave you a raise, last week, don't go into his office like a month from now and ask for another raise.
Just give me another raise, please. Just one more.
Yeah. Like, maybe if it's like been like 5 years, okay, fine, ask for a raise. But, don't go into his office every month asking for a raise. It's just not.
Definitely.
It's boss is going to irritate at you and probably never give you a raise.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's also, and just dealing with raises and things like that. Another thing too to always be aware of is, there's if you can calculate, like, oh, I bring this company this amount of money, and so this is extra money that I'm responsible for, that goes beyond like what you guys pay me to do. It's kind of like, that's the reason why you get that profit anyways.
Yeah,
it's always good to be like aware of that too. And if you make some sort of like like argument that it's because of me that I got this thing, then it's like, your bosses are kind of more they're more receptive to it, but all that really deals with kind of just thinking within their perspective, thinking what they would thinking like them, and then kind of approaching them with that.
Yeah, and don't get greedy about how much of a raise you want.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that could, again, don't go past your mark. That could shoot down all your chances.
Exactly.
To build more in the future.
Yeah, and it's like I think the main theme here is you always need something you're working to, right? Because what ends up happening is when you have something you're working to, you can always center yourself on, okay, am I doing this thing? Yes. If yes, then, good, let me keep at it. If no, then, okay, what should I do to achieve this thing? You know what I mean? So when you reach the end of the goal and you have nothing you're aiming at, then you have nothing to center yourself with. So what ends up happening is when you don't have something you're sent to center yourself on, you're working all on emotion and then not at all on strategy. And strategy is very important. So when you're working on emotion, that's what opens you up to all these pitfalls. You know what I mean? So even like the thing with like what we're just talking about the raise and everything like that. If you can, put some sort of presentation together saying why you can, you need a certain amount of money because you earned that money and you're bringing the company that money, then it's like, that's the goal you're working at. Once you get that goal, now you could be like, and then, maybe greed works in there. Then you could be like, oh, I deserve more. But it's like you're not working off a certain strategy. You're working off your ego and off your self-gratification and, all this, narcissism and all that other stuff. So I feel like that's the main thing here. You always need something that stabilizes you, something that centers you. that you're working towards. I mean, human progression is one of the biggest kind of things that we need to, the biggest necessities for us. When you feel like the work you're doing is worthless or it's not bringing you anywhere, that's usually what leads to a lot of like depression and kind of bad stuff like that. So I feel like there's definitely a lot of wisdom in this law here. So
absolutely.
Yep.
Reversal time.
Reversal time. Green talks about two main things. First thing is it talks about just kind of how the aimlessness of finishing or of kind of, instead of achieving a goal, kind of wavering back and forth between it. When you're in a position to destroy someone, he talks about in the context of war, when you're in a position to destroy someone or to leave him, sometimes it's and you go back and forth. Sometimes you destroy him, sometimes you leave him, and people see that. They kind of tend to you tend to kind of build up a lot of enemies that way, and a lot of resentment that way. He's more or less saying that it's good to pick one way or the other. Either destroy the person and don't go around gloating about it, or don't destroy that person. But also kind of just work within the context of whatever it is that your goal is. But either do something all the way or not do it, but don't go halfway with it. And actually, that actually works. That refers to another law we talked about when we talked about I think it was Chuko Liang and everything like that. And then he also talks about how it's situations where when you're cautious after victories, sometimes that could actually be a detriment, because some people will achieve a victory and then become cautious about the things that they've attained from that victory. So they'll be very risk averse, and they won't be as bold in other situations because they feel like they have more to lose. So it's good to be kind of aware of that and to not be hesitant after a big victory. So those are the two reversals.
All right.
Let's move right along to the last law, Law 48, which is assume formlessness. The judgment is, by taking a shape, by having a visible plan, you open yourself to attack. Instead of taking a form for your enemy to grasp, keep yourself adaptable and on the move. Accept the fact that nothing is certain and no law is fixed. The best way to protect yourself is to be as fluid and formless as water. Never bet on stability or lasting order. Everything changes. In martial arts, oh no, that's it. I was about to read
about something. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to start this off instead of jumping right into the observance right off the bat. I wanted to start this off by comparing, as Robert Greene did, the game of chess and the game of Go, and this will relate to the observance, I promise.
Absolutely.
So, chess, for those of you who've played it, it's a game that's played on a very restricted area, right? And the object of the game is to take out the king, basically. So it's in a very restricted area. You don't have a whole lot of pieces, and it's basically an aggressive goal. So basically, the game of chess favors a quick line of thinking, like a quick strategy. You want to achieve this objective as quickly as possible without losing as many pieces of your pieces as possible. So it's like both. It's like you want to be defensive and aggressive at the same time. So you want to be quick. So there's no like war of attrition in chess. I mean, you can do that, but it'll take a long time, and you may not be successful at it. You generally want to try to be as quick as possible.
Efficient.
Yeah. However, the game of Go, which in China is very popular in China, over there it's known as I think it's called Weiqi. Is what they call it there. Yeah, Weiqi. Go is very different. Go is played, first of all, on a much larger board, and the goal of Go is to surround your opponent's pieces and isolate them, right? So it does no good to keep all of your pieces in one concentrated area because, your opponent can just surround you, right?
Yeah.
You want to kind of spread out, and if you lose some ground here and there, that's not a big deal because that sacrifice of that ground can lead to a much larger victory later on. We kind of talked about that in the last law. So, and also too, the goal isn't to kill the enemy. It's to burn your opponent's pieces like it is in chess, but it's just to paralyze them, to immobilize them. So it's a much different end in mind. You're working on a much larger plane, and your objective is a bit different, but the result is the same: victory.
Yeah.
So, bearing all that in mind, now this is kind of like an East versus West kind of thing. Chess is obviously, from the Western world. Go. It's very obviously from the Eastern world.
Yeah.
And it kind of teaches us about these differing philosophies when it comes to warfare. And we most see it clearly after World War II in China when the Japanese were expelled. So we talked about this before where before the Japanese invaded in the very beginning of World War II in China and Manchuria, there was a civil war going on between the communists and the nationalists. And the nationalists were obviously not communists. But they halted that war so that they could, take care of the Japanese threat. Once the Japanese were gone, though, they were right back at it with each other, right? So the leader of the nationalists, he was educated in Western warfare. And Mao Zedong, on the other hand, had no military experience. He was just a poet, but a big fan of the game of Go or Wei Chi. So, bearing all that in mind, the nationalist goal was to go into Manchuria, where basically that's where the communists didn't have a whole lot of land, and all the territory they did have was like an isolated rural pockets of Manchuria, basically. So the goal was for the nationalists was just to take the major cities there and then use them as like bases and, to, basically send out troops and little by little wipe out the communists and just sweep through Manchuria.
Okay.
So the nationalists achieved their objective. They got those big cities, but they were not as successful as weeding out the communists, because the communists were employing like hit and run tactics and guerrilla warfare, and they would disperse all the time. So like there wasn't never a large company of communists for them to take down.
Yeah.
And their strategy seemed kind of all over the place. Like they would take a town and then they would just desert it the next day. So like there was no like base of operations from which the communists were operating from. It just seemed scatterbrained. And you would think, well, what good does this do? Well, what happened was, in order for those cities that the nationalists had taken to function and to communicate, there had to be communication line. There would be supply lines. So the communists would attack those supply lines and basically cut off communication to the other cities, supplies like food and ammunition, stuff like that. Yeah. Not only that, but they would drop propaganda onto into the cities as well, and like blare propaganda like on like loudspeakers and then take off.
Yeah.
And so that kind of worked to demoralize the nationalist soldiers, because it was like they were surrounded by these communists and they were just like an island of protection in a sea of what they thought was a sea of communists, when in truth and actuality they actually outnumbered the communists. And when the communists did do direct attacks onto a city, they would take it all at once, because again, the supplies were running thin, the communication was sparse, they didn't know when the communists were going to attack and weren't going to attack. And also too, the nationalist troops had become so demoralized that a lot of times the cities surrendered before they were even attacked to the communists. And so using that strategy, Mao Zedong was able to not only push out the nationalists to take over all Manchuria, took over the rest of China. And that's more of using the go tactic, where he essentially surrounded these cities and kind of cut themselves off from one another, and just paralyzed them.
Exactly.
Whereas the nationalists had used more of a chess move. They wanted to get in and be aggressive and weed out the communists as soon as possible. Yeah. So kind of the lesson here is, especially nowadays as we've progressed worldwide, really, from kind of taking on more of a abstract approach to just about everything, but particularly warfare, it's probably more so now than ever to understand that formlessness rather, is a means to attain power. Yeah. And if the more formless you can be, the more power you can amass. It's kind of like water itself doesn't change, but if you put it into a different environment, it will move around whatever it is. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But it maintains its structure.
It maintains structure regardless of environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of like what do you want to go at, and that's exactly what Mao Zedong did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mao's strategy in that case used kind of not just the element of force when he had to, obviously, but also just mentally, he more or less broke them down. And he kind of did that by, like you're saying, using more of the tactics from the game Go instead of chess, which was, you have them surrounded physically, and it's engaging their senses. You know what I mean? Like, because they can see what's going on. They're surrounded everywhere. There's propaganda everywhere, from what they're hearing, and they're just surrounded by it everywhere. It's affecting all their senses, and it breaks them down that way. It's much better to have, if you're in a war setting, it's kind of, instead of you winning because you killed everyone or you were forceful with everyone, but instead of winning that way, if you won by just having all the people still alive and still, functioning and everything, saying, we give up. It's much better that way, when you're dealing in a war-like environment. So he used that. He did everything. He did what he could without force, and he was able to get that. He was able to, I guess, win that way. Yeah. So I think it dealt with the mental also, on top of the physical.
Yeah, and the thing that Green talked a lot about was avoiding the forms. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, is avoiding, sticking to one form or another. Yeah, to again be like water, like move about. And I think that's really good for like a business, for example. Yeah, I think businesses that fail are usually ones that they came up with a formula. And they stuck to that to the end. Yep. And that's not how the nature of things work. Things change. I mean, a good example is Best Buy. For years they were way out ahead in terms of sales and electronics. Yeah. And then Amazon came around, and people would go into Best Buy, try out the camera or the phone or whatever, and then they would go buy off Amazon where it was cheaper. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so Best Buy was losing a lot of business. And somewhere along the line, they came to the realization of, why don't we offer what we have in the store at the same price as what's on Amazon? Mm-hmm. And then that way, the customer will come in, try out the whatever electronic gadget is, and then they'll buy it in the store, and instead of losing our profits to Amazon. Yeah. And then also, too, the customer's more likely to come back because they get to try it out in person. Yeah. And we can have our sales associates be personable with them and, and help them out and be helpful towards them. And that creates a positive purchasing experience.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So Best Buy is different than like some other companies that Amazon has basically taken out. Yeah. Toys R Us didn't do that. Yeah. But Best Buy kind of saw what they could do differently, and that's why now they're actually experiencing growth, whereas a lot of other department stores are failing.
Yeah. I feel like the transgression to your observance there of Best Buy versus Amazon you can kind of look at a company like a Blockbuster, right, versus Netflix, right? Where when Netflix first came out, they were they were doing something newer that in the market that Blockbuster wasn't really hip to, which was you can order DVDs, we'll send it in the mail, but there are also a select number of things you can watch online. And Blockbuster had a lot of time to kind of respond to that by saying, hey, we own all these movies and stuff, or all these movies, we have like contracts with like, all these studios, let's take advantage of what they're doing. We can actually corner the market here and show a lot of our stuff instantly online, but they decided not to. And they were kind of held to like, historically we've done things this way. We're going to stick by it. And so that's what they did because, it had worked for years. And then, Netflix starts coming along. They start doing the instant thing. And now Netflix it's a household name now. It's gotten to the point where it's, the same way people would say, I have to Xerox that when they wanted to say like, I have to print that. You could just say, oh, Netflix it. Netflix has become a verb. It's not just a company. And it's because they took advantage of things like that. And a company like Blockbuster that had been around for years died off because they wouldn't adapt. They wouldn't adapt to how the culture is now and how people kind of digest, or consume, entertainment.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the Blockbuster example is perfect because, well, like he says, I'm going to quote Robert Greene directly here. It says, when locked in the past, the powerful look comical. They are overripe fruit waiting to fall from the tree. It's kind of like, it's kind of like Blockbuster.
Yeah.
They were so, they were so locked into their past success that when Netflix came around, it became comical for someone to still have a Blockbuster card.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely.
You kind of became the butt of a joke a little bit.
Yeah,
it's like, really, you're still driving to the Blockbuster when you could just stay home and
you have a
watch whatever
Blockbuster
you
video
want.
card?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things.
Yeah, definitely.
And something that I kind of allude to a little bit was that human beings their creations are, they're more abstract than concrete. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean like that everything we make is abstract, but everything starts off abstract, right? It may become concrete, but it starts off abstract. Like any bridge that's ever been built was started by an abstracted idea of, well, why don't we build something across this waterway so we can cross it?
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Every creation happens twice, like Stephen Covey says. Once in the mind and then physically when you actually do it. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the thing is once it's made, once it's concretely made, it's concretely made. But what's great about the human mind is that you can always innovate on top of that. And that's why, we have all kinds of bridges. We have suspension bridges, we have drawbridges, we have, and because we can continue to build upon our previous success. If we didn't do that, all the bridges would probably be the same from when they were back in the day.
It was made out of mud and
and that's not going to work for every environment. Like we have a bridge here in our local area called the Roosevelt Bridge, and it's this massive concrete bridge that goes over the St. Lucie River so that sailboats can go underneath it without having to do the drawbridge thing.
Yeah.
Right next to it is the old Roosevelt Bridge, which is still a drawbridge, and they still have to put the drawbridge up. They still haven't gotten rid of the bridge, but because it's still, people still use it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's the sailboats are generally try to go over to the newer Roosevelt Bridge.
Yeah.
Instead of unless they absolutely have to go where the older one is, then they will. But they try to go to the larger one, and so that's an adaptation to the environment. At the same time, though, you could not build a Roosevelt Bridge in like where the Golden Gate Bridge is.
Yeah.
Because it's, first of all, we're not talking about a river now. We're talking about San Francisco Bay.
Yeah.
And it's wickedly windy there.
Yeah.
So they had to build a suspension bridge so that it would move with the wind. If you just built that, like what we have in our area, that big Roosevelt concrete bridge, it would blow over basically because over time with all that wind, it would create cracks in the concrete and it would destroy that
dead
bridge.
loads and live loads.
Yeah. So that's the thing is you have to be able to abstractly imagine like, is this bridge going to work in this environment, or do we need to come up with something different? And it's that ability to abstractly think is why you have companies like Amazon who put other retailers out of business because they can think, well, is there a way we can provide our customers with these goods without them even leaving their house? It's that abstraction that gives people power, not being locked to just the concrete reality of being able to imagine beyond that reality.
I believe on top of that, on top of kind of the adaptability that the practice of using adaptability when it comes to creating things either physically or mentally or anything like that, I think actually on its most basic level, this law is really part of the reason why there exists successful people who have suffered major setbacks, all types of setbacks, whatever it is, whether it's, some folks who, went to war and lost a limb, then came back and are like, #1 track runners and stuff like that, or people who have been severely burned or bruised who are like, CEOs making all this money and things like that. It's really kind of empowering on its most basic level, because it's essentially telling you, okay, look, what's the situation? It's this. Okay, how can I thrive in that situation? And then you give yourself that latitude to discover a way, to kind of discover that path for you, like water, to flow through that opening and to continue that way. It's empowering at its most basic level, because you're not necessarily giving yourself any excuses. You're not giving yourself any reasons to not succeed. If you just say, okay, let me adapt to whatever situation I'm in and thrive in it, then you can really achieve a lot. It's actually, I believe, a lot of this comes from kind of a Stoic philosophy that Green has been pretty open about, that he's, he follows a lot of like the Stoic philosophies and things like that. But it's essentially empowering because it's just letting you. It's pretty much just saying, I will be like water and I'll find a way in any situation. Whether that opening is very small or whether it's big, I'm gonna kind of get to that. So I think a lot of people who've been very successful after major setbacks, if you kind of dig in through some of their biographies or you read about some of the stuff they went through, they'll share sentiment very common to what Green is talking about in this law, I think.
Well, yeah, that, and also too, it's kind of like, in order for you to be successful with formlessness, you have to learn to not take things personally, right? Not get defensive.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say that about like somebody who, I guess they kind of comment on that they don't like whatever it is that you're working on, right?
Yeah.
They insult you. You just don't take it personally, and you just keep doing what you're doing. But you could take it from a step further, like what you're talking about, where people go to war, they lose a limb, and then they end up being track stars, right? They very easily could have taken that loss of their limb personally and not let that affect them.
Yeah.
Or they could just basically not allow that to affect them. Don't let it get to them.
Yeah.
Move beyond it. If anything, they may even be able to take that loss and turn it into motivation to gain something in the future.
Absolutely.
I think we talked about that recently in one of our laws. So when I say formlessness, I want to make sure that we're discussing formlessness as a tool, not as a go with the flow philosophy or a philosophy that's all about inner peace or like kind of religion of some kind. Because in this, I mean, certainly a go with the flow attitude is great to have. Finding inner peace or or something like that. That's all well good too. But formlessness is an outward strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking the abstract and making it into a reality. It's getting that idea of the bridge and then building it. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about formlessness.
Absolutely.
It's not the same thing as just being like, oh,
yeah. Whatever
horror,
goes,
comedy,
goes.
whatever, man. Sounds good.
Yeah.
It's knowing that we want to build a bridge.
Yeah.
We don't want to just have like a cable system or a fair. We want to build a bridge.
Absolutely.
But we're willing to adapt to what kind of bridge it will be, depending on the environment that we're in.
Yeah, you still have the goal in mind, like we were talking about in the previous law. You still have that victory that you're trying to attain. But now it's all about how you get to that victory.
Yeah.
Within certain constraints, Yeah. So that like you were saying with the bridge in San Francisco. Oh, San Francisco has these massive, wind issues. How do we overcome that? And we overcome it by doing something. So really, I mean, the path from kind of what Green was talking about too, with just kind of go with the flow kind of stuff. It's letting things get in the way of me getting from point A to point B, right? So it's like something's interfering you to get from point A to point B, so you go to C instead. You just deal with that. You just go, I'll just go to C because the elements cause me to go to C and not B. So boom, that's what it is. I feel like what the point of this law that Green's trying to get to is still go from A to B, but maybe you might have to take a longer route. Or maybe you could take a shorter route. Because maybe something's conspiring with you. Something's conspiring against you, but you still keep the path, in mind, and just go. You still attain your goal though.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this in previous law, especially I think the law was, don't fill the shoes of someone great who came before you.
Yeah,
it's kind of saying that it's great to take other people's advice, but you also have to make it your own. You have to make other previous formulas of success. You have to adapt it to your own needs at that moment. Like if there's no way that every businessman has followed like one way to achieve success in their business, right? It's always been, well, here's the general idea, but I did this and I addressed this issue by doing this.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that step, I did this,
Yeah.
Point is it's you have to strike out on your own. You can take advice from others, but ultimately you have to be able to go, that's great, let's do that, or no, I don't want to do that because I want to have a different result, or we have a different problem that we're trying to overcome here, so that's not going to work.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a very it's actually interesting that this law comes at the end, because there are a lot of other kind of laws superimposed within it, but I think another element of this that we had talked about a little bit earlier, I guess, is about how important discipline is in terms of this. So we're talking about kind of not taking things personally, but there's obviously a lot about yourself you have to steady in order to assume formlessness and things like that, because on the way to finding out a path around certain obstacles, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to be discouraged, a lot of opportunities for you to be to kind of to knock you down, and just kind of and so someone who's not very disciplined within themselves, they'll kind of go through a lot. Not that it can actually be a very good learning opportunity for you and a good way for you to steady yourself and then find solutions through it. But I feel like that's also part of what Green is talking about here. On top of things like being not taking things personally, not letting just random events get you down and things like that. So the discipline aspect is also something I think that's very important.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that this came at the end of the book because it's called the 48 Laws of Power.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, here's 48 rules for you to follow.
Yeah.
Well, you have to be able to adapt them to your own situation and to what's, relevant to your life.
Yeah.
And we're getting towards the end here. So we always say, we'd like for people to use these laws in a moralistic way. 100%. And you totally can. And in fact, if anything, this last law tells you that you can. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of these laws are ruthless for sure. But, truth be told, a lot of people use ruthless means to make gains. Yeah. And if you
Jack Bauer does that.
Yeah. And and if you just kind of turn a blind eye to that because you don't want to believe that, well, you're setting yourself up to be manipulated.
Yeah.
So it's good to know these laws that other people in power have followed to achieve success, so that you can emulate them in the best cases, and then you can learn how to defend yourself against them in the worst cases.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
So, with that, I say, this whole process of going through this book has been really great. I think it's great that it ends with this kind of formlessness aspect, because it allows the reader to take what they've learned and make it work for themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of a beautiful, full circle thing that I didn't pick up on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like he's saying these are all the rules, and then, you can use them. It depends on you. It depends on your situation and where you are and how you use it. You could, if you had that bent towards kind of ruthlessness and I'm going to achieve things in whatever means possible, then you could use all these in a not so moralistic way and take advantage of people and manipulate them and all that stuff. Or you could do it in a very moralistic way. You could. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in everything Green pointed out here. The same kind of wisdom you could find in like a Bible or in any self-help book even. It's all there and so it's that's something I didn't pick up on. It's very cool.
Please use them for moralistic ends, folks.
Yeah, please do.
Reversal?
Yes, let's do the reversal. And we kind of touched on it a little bit here, and it was also touched on Law 40, but essentially saying that I'll just read off the first sentence that he says here. Using space to disperse and create an abstract pattern should not mean forsaking the concentration of your power when it is valuable to you. The same. This is essentially saying that just because you have to kind of adapt and things like that doesn't mean that you shouldn't concentrate on what the way I read it is on what the end goal in mind is. So just because you have to maybe take a longer journey to get from A to B doesn't mean that you just forego B and go to C. It's all about still concentrating your forces in terms of what I want to do and what the goal is, but just try to find whatever means possible, whatever again moralistic means possible to get there, to adapt to the situation and things like that. That's more or less that's more or less what he says here. He ends up with saying, when you play with formlessness, keep on top of the process and keep your long-term strategy in mind. And that's essentially the reversal for 48.
All right. Well, everyone, we really appreciate you taking this journey with us through the 48 Laws of Power. I hope it's been as informative for you all as it has been for us. And with that, Rudy.
This is the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing off. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.